when the first footage emerged of American M1A2 Abrams tanks rolling through the battle-scarred fields of eastern Ukraine, the world paused. These machines, icons of American military dominance for over 4 decades, had finally entered the theater of one of the most brutal modern land wars, and they were not there for training or symbolic presence. They were sent to fight, and fight they did. The reactions from across the globe were immediate and varied. Western military analysts, journalists, defense ministers, and ordinary citizens all watched with bated breath as Ukraine deployed the Abrams in coordinated assaults against entrenched Russian positions. For months, speculation had circled about whether the Abrams would truly make a difference, and now that question was being put to the test in real time. From the first hours of combat, NATO observers reported with increasing confidence that the Abrams was performing exactly as expected, if not better. In one engagement near the Zaporizhzhia front, a formation of Abrams tanks supported by mechanized infantry launched a swift assault on a fortified Russian position believed to be held by elements of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division. Using thermal optics and battlefield intelligence provided by NATO satellites and reconnaissance drones, the Ukrainian crews were able to target and destroy key Russian armored units before those units even saw the Abrams approaching. The results were devastating for Russia. At least 3 Russian armored columns were broken in under 48 hours. T-72s and T-90s, caught in exposed positions, were no match for the Abrams' superior fire control systems, advanced armor, and powerful 120mm smoothbore gun. Several videos began to circulate online, grainy but unmistakable, showing the American-built tanks shrugging off anti-tank missile strikes and returning fire with deadly precision. In Brussels, NATO's top defense officials held emergency briefings, not because the situation was out of control, but because it was shifting so dramatically in Ukraine's favor. One senior NATO commander, speaking off the record, noted that the deployment of the Abrams was a turning point, not tactically alone, but psychologically. For months, Russian propaganda had downplayed the threat of Western tanks. Now, their losses told a different story. Even in countries that had been more hesitant to supply Ukraine with heavy weaponry, the mood began to shift. Germany, which had already sent Leopard 2 tanks, saw renewed public support for expanding its aid. In Poland and the Baltic states, defense ministries published detailed reports praising the Abrams' performance, using it as proof of concept for their own modernization programs. In the United States, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle issued statements lauding the effectiveness of American hardware in the hands of skilled Ukrainian crews. One senator called the Abrams the spearhead of freedom. But perhaps the most telling reactions came from inside Russia. Telegram channels tied to Wagner Group veterans and pro-war bloggers erupted in anger and disbelief. "These aren't just tanks," wrote one Russian commentator. "They are a symbol of our failure to stop NATO's expansion." Another compared the arrival of Abrams tanks to the introduction of the Stinger missile in Afghanistan, a weapon that had changed the course of that conflict by making Soviet helicopters vulnerable. On the battlefield, Russian morale appeared to waver. Several intercepted radio transmissions, later leaked by Ukrainian intelligence, revealed panic and confusion among Russian armored crews. In one chilling clip, a tank commander can be heard shouting, "We can't engage! They're cutting through us like paper." The psychological impact of facing the Abrams, a machine that had never been defeated in battle by Soviet or Russian-made tanks, was beginning to show. Western analysts began tracking Russian losses with increasing detail. Satellite imagery confirmed that at least 2 Russian regiments had been rendered combat ineffective in just 1 week of fighting against Abrams-led operations. Burned-out hulks of T-80s and BMPs littered roads and fields, many of them destroyed at ranges beyond the effective return fire of Russian units. This level of attrition was not something the Russian military had prepared for. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, their doctrine had adapted to counter Soviet-era equipment with which they were familiar. But the Abrams changed the equation. Its sensor fusion, battlefield networking, and survivability made it not just a weapon, but a force multiplier that elevated the entire Ukrainian formation in which it served. Internationally, the message was clear. Ukraine could not only hold its own, but with the right support, could push back decisively. In Paris, London, and Ottawa, the media began running headlines like, "The Abrams breaks through," or "Russia's armored edge lost." Defense analysts featured on television openly questioned how long the Kremlin could sustain such losses, especially as its elite units were being worn down by a relentless and increasingly well-equipped opponent. Meanwhile, in Washington, U.S. military officials carefully monitored Abrams' performance data being relayed from Ukraine. They were particularly interested in how the tanks fared under real combat conditions against Russia's best anti-tank systems, including Kornet missiles and Lancet drones. Preliminary reports were encouraging. Although several Abrams had been hit, their crews had survived in most cases, thanks to the tank's layered armor and explosion mitigation technologies. By the end of the second week of operations, estimates suggested Russia had lost over 130 armored vehicles in areas where Abrams tanks were confirmed to be operating. That number was rising daily. Ukrainian soldiers, emboldened by these victories, began coordinating more complex operations with their American-supplied tanks at the center. Videos showed Abrams tanks covering infantry advances, destroying entrenched bunkers, and acting as mobile artillery support with devastating effect. There was, of course, criticism as well. Some skeptics pointed out that Western tanks were expensive to operate, and that logistics could become a challenge as fighting moved deeper into contested territory. But for now, the evidence on the ground favored the decision to send them. As NATO briefed its members on the evolving situation, a common theme began to emerge. The Abrams had done more than destroy Russian armor. It had shattered the myth of Russian dominance. And in doing so, it redefined what was possible on the battlefield in Ukraine.